Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today I'm going to talk about some 2019 NBA free agents, but not so much the guys that we talk about all the time like KD and Kawhi and Kemba Walker, but more so some of the guys that we don't talk about that are having a great start to this season and as a result could end up with a big contract. This list is going to focus primarily on some of those guys that are a little bit under the radar, and because of the amount of cap space that's around the league this summer, there's going to be money out there for these guys to potentially get some really big contracts. So let's go ahead and get started. Number 1, Tobias Harris. This is a guy that when you saw the title of the video, I'm sure many of you expected to be on here because he has had an awesome start to the season with the Clippers team that's also had a really good start as a team. Harris is a guy that's continued to develop throughout his career, and although he might not be a star caliber or all-star caliber player, he's still a very efficient scorer on the wing, even though if he doesn't provide that much on the defensive end. Now for him specifically, what kind of deal he's going to be able to sign this summer really depends on what the Clippers are up to, as I talked about in one of my most recent videos, because they have the opportunity to potentially sign some big max contract guys, or keep Tobias Harris around with just one new max contract guy, or just run it back with this same group. So it's going to be really interesting to try and see how his plans line up with those of the team. But on the positive side for him, he is still young and he's entering his prime, and since he's developed his game so much throughout the league, it is not out of the question to consider that he might become a better defender as well. So he might actually be a perfect fit for a team like the Kings this offseason. And it would have been nice if they would have just drafted their 3 of the future in Luka Doncic when they were sitting there at number 2 overall, but that's an entirely different conversation. The point I'm trying to make here is the Kings are a good up-and-coming team. They're going to have cap space this summer, and they could really use a good on-off ball wing like Harris. In the end, I definitely think he's going to get a raise from what he's making this season, although I don't know how crazy it's going to be because it's so difficult to project, especially so far away from free agency. But Tobias Harris is definitely a guy to keep an eye on in terms of potentially getting a big deal this summer. Number 2, Willie Cauley-Stein. Speaking of the Kings, this is a guy that I'm really happy is finding some success this season, because this is always the player that Willie Cauley-Stein was supposed to be coming out of college. At Kentucky, he established himself as a guy that's going to run to the rim, going to protect the rim, and has an unusual ability to be versatile on the defensive end and switch on to guards and stay in front of them, which is a very valuable skill in the modern NBA. The problem is, in his first handful of seasons with the Kings, they drafted like 6 big men and always tried to put him in the front court alongside another big. For the first little bit, it was DeMarcus Cousins, and then they just continued to invest in the front court for some reason. But this season, they finally put some guys around him that can shoot and can create and can defend, and now he's the player that he was always supposed to be. Now, obviously, he has to continue this level of production to be able to get as big of a deal as he really wants, and given his age, this is probably his only chance for a huge NBA contract. But in my opinion, if he can keep up this level of production and continue to be a really good player for the Kings, he's probably going to sign a deal that's worth more than what Clint Capella signed with the Rockets last offseason, simply because of circumstance. As I'm going to say multiple times throughout the video, there is a lot of cap space available this summer, especially relative to last season. So guys of similar talent levels are going to sign for bigger deals this year than they did last year. But the question is, do the Kings really want to pay that? They did show a willingness last offseason to spend big money in free agency because they offered Zach LaVine a big deal that the Bulls ultimately matched, and I think that deal, 4 years, around $80 million, is probably going to be what Willie Cauley-Stein is going to be worth on an open market this summer, and I don't really know that the Kings are going to want to pay that. And that's something you're going to see with a lot of guys on this list, because even though, yes, they're about to get paid, and they've had very good starts to the season, they might not necessarily be signing contracts that they're really worth because of the circumstances of the summer of 2019. Numbers 3 and 4, Spencer Dinwiddie and D'Angelo Russell. Next up are 2 guards from my very own Brooklyn Nets, and they've both been very good to start this season, especially once Caris LeVert went down with his injury because they've had to carry more of an offensive burden. And overall, I'm pretty happy with how the team has played so far this year. They definitely could be higher in the standings. They've had some tough luck late in games, but overall, these 2 have been really good and look to be on pace to sign big deals this summer. If I was going to have to pick one to sign long term, it probably would be Russell, just given his age and his potential, but I just don't really see that either of them are going to be worth the deals that they're going to sign this summer. I would imagine that Russell is going to sign for more money than Dinwiddie, although they're both very good players, but again, I just don't know that they're going to be worth it. On the other hand, the Nets have been trying to dig them out of the hole that Billy King dug for them for a while, and they've started to show some real progress in that direction this season, so maybe they won't want to let go of that and they'll bring one or both of these guys back. But either way, both of these guys are going to get a raise this summer, but I definitely don't think that a guy like Russell is worth a max contract. Number 5, Derrick Rose. Next up is a guy that I certainly did not expect to be on this list, because when I watched Derrick Rose play with the Timberwolves last season, I honestly thought his career was probably over very, very soon. He did not look good. He didn't look like he was going to be able to shoot very well. And even though he occasionally had some good performances, he mostly was just not a very good NBA player. And then to start this season, Tom Thibodeau made some comments about him potentially being one of the best players in the league again. And we all know how Tibbs is about his former Bulls players, so I didn't put really any stock into it at all. And every single night that Derrick Rose continues to sustain this level of production, I'm honestly surprised, but I'm also happy for him at the same time. He's overcome so much to be able to put up these kinds of numbers this season, and as a result, he might end up getting a pretty significant raise this summer. You obviously have to consider both his age as well as his injury history, so it's probably not going to be anything remotely resembling a long-term deal, but I do think it's going to be a raise on a one-year basis. But once again, that's assuming he's going to be able to sustain this level of production, and keeping up that high three-point shooting number is going to be very key to doing that. Number 6, JaVale McGee. Next up is a guy similar to Rose in that he's probably not going to get a long-term deal this summer, but he's going to get a raise. JaVale McGee has been exactly what the Lakers needed at the 5 spot, especially early in the season, and although Tyson Chandler has cut into his role a bit, he's still been extremely productive. Remember, this is a guy that signed for a cheap deal this summer after some really productive seasons in Golden State, but he's proved himself to be honestly one of the better values in the league. Like I said though, he probably won't get a long-term deal, but I could see a situation playing out similar to how Rondo got like a 1-year, $9 million deal with the Lakers this season after playing on a cheap deal in New Orleans last year and being a key part of their postseason success. Number 7 and 8, Nikola Mirotic and Julius Randle. Speaking of the Pelicans, here are two players that have been putting up fantastic numbers to start this season, even though the pace has slowed down a bit for their team after a hot start. Now, I wouldn't put too much stock into those numbers because the Pelicans do play at one of the fastest paces in the league, but in terms of surface level production, both of these guys have certainly been getting it done. Now, as always with New Orleans, there's the possibility that either these guys don't finish out the season with them and they try and move them at the trade deadline for another semi-all-star in a last-ditch effort to try and convince Anthony Davis to stay around. So even if it isn't New Orleans that ends up giving these guys a big deal, just as I've talked about with almost every player on this list, I think somebody is going to pay them. Both of them, especially Randle, are still relatively young, so they do still hold value over the long term, and it's obviously impossible for me to project what kind of deal they would sign in terms of money. I do think they're going to get pretty solid 3 to 4 year deals. Number 9, Nikola Vuvecic. Next up is a guy that to me is similar to Derrick Rose in that every single time he continues to sustain this level of production, I'm honestly surprised. I keep expecting Nikola Vucevic's numbers to just fall off at some point and return to the player that we've known for the last couple of seasons, but this year he's just been a different guy. Now, one thing I do have in mind though is that Orlando did get off to a good start last season and didn't finish it off very well, but it's starting to seem like this team as well as this player are putting up sustainable levels of production. The problem for Vucevic is he's never really going to be a very good defender. He's approaching his 30s, and he's probably not in the plans for Orlando moving forward, with Jonathan Isaac and Mo Bamba being the future in the front court. However, he is very skilled and can really score the basketball, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him end up signing a big deal this summer, but I also wouldn't be shocked if Orlando tried to move him to a different team, depending on where they are in the standings, just to try and get some value out of him before he walks this summer. Number 10, Khris Middleton. Last up is a guy that I actually mentioned in my Eastern Conference preview video as a potential dark horse all-star this season, and that's Khris Middleton. Some of his per-game numbers are actually down from last season, but he's the second best player behind MVP Giannis on one of the best teams in the league to start this season. He has a huge impact as a shooter, shot creator, and defender, and is really exactly what Milwaukee needs on this team. Just like with everybody else, things could always cool off, and for him specifically, injuries have been an issue for an extended period of time. But if he can stay healthy and maintain this level of production just like everybody else on this list, for me, I think Khris Middleton could potentially sign a deal worth upwards of $25 million a year this summer, and I would be shocked if he doesn't sign that with the Bucks. Now, I've been wrong about Bucks free agents in the past, but I can't imagine a situation in which Khris Middleton does not play for the Bucks next season. And that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.